Okay, let's move on and talk about another important news, and that is the rules that the National Housing Board, or the NHB, has come out with respect to housing finance companies, or HFCs. Now, what exactly does the circular say? Well, first up, it is advising against servicing of dues by builders on behalf of borrowers. Any prevalent products that the housing finance companies have issued must be reviewed. Also, it will be effective where the housing finance companies are yet to disburse the sanctions. There will be no upfront disbursal for incomplete projects as well. And the disbursal of loans will have to be linked to the stage of construction. So I think it's not just NBFCs which may be impacted in terms of, lower loan growth or something, but also the real estate companies which, depend on NBFCs for their financing and their projects. Now, we have brokerages as well that have come out with their notes. Antique says that the HFCs dependent on developer loans will naturally suffer, and accordingly they see a limited impact on Canfin Homes and Repco Home Finance. Morgan Stanley believes that this is an additional headwind for stressed developers, and this action of course has been taken after fraud complaints by developers. So let's understand then the impact of this circular on one such company, that's Repco Home Finance. Like Antique said, they don't see much of an impact on Repco, but it's best heard from the MD and CEO himself, Mr. Yashpal Gupta. Mr. Gupta, thank you for joining us on ET Now. Good afternoon. Let's first understand that will these stricter norms on all these subvention schemes mean almost like the near death of small developers? And also, if we could get your assessment of what the impact will be for the segment as a whole, housing finance companies as a whole.
Good morning. First of all, obviously this will have some effect on the immediate term on both HFCs as well as the developers. Though it will not be significant, but in the long term, but in the short term, it may have effect. But as you rightly said, for companies like Repco Finance, we have zero exposure to such products. So for us, it will not affect at all. But for the other HFCs who have large exposure, especially in the Mumbai and Delhi areas, they probably will be affected. And developers who were also depending on these funds to a large extent, their liquidity will be further affected. But I think in the long run, it will stabilize. But in the short term, it will have an effect.
When we talk about this, of course, in the near term, there could be a transition impact on the sector. But do you believe that this itself was pretty small when you look at the entire sector? So it may not have a very big impact even in the near term?
Yeah, so as far as the numbers are concerned, of course, these numbers are not available in public domain. But I think it will have a small impact for the HFC sector. It was maybe about 5 to 10% of their book. But for the real estate players, in some cases it was as high as 20-25%. In some cases it was 5%. It will have a different degree of impact it will not be uniform across the players. But yes, for some of the developers will be affected, and as you rightly said, it will affect their liquidity position further.
Mr. Gupta, if we have to talk about Repco Home Finance itself, what sort of an exposure do you have on these developer loans, etc., where, the NHB has really come out hard restricting and curtailing the sort of loans that can be given by by HFCs? If you could talk about your exposure.
Our exposure is zero.
Okay.
Our exposure is zero.
Okay, so that's good to know. All right. If you could also talk about, the entire norms with respect to sanction loans where disbursements are to be commenced, and also the fact that housing loan dispersals are strictly linked to construction. So the fact that loans will be linked to construction now, will that impact as well HFC players and also, of course, the loans given by them to developers?
See, as far as that is concerned, the impact will be more of a procedural issues. That how do you verify how much construction is completed, whether 30%, whether 35%, whether 40%. In terms of the numbers for us, it will not affect us. As I told you, those who are giving upfront, it will affect them. But in terms of compliance, there may be some issues. But fortunately, our book of this apartment financing is only about 10 to 15%. So we'll try to work out a mechanism. The challenge for us will be to monitor and also justify on record that construction is still 20% complete, 30% complete, like that. It will be more of a compliance issue for us rather than a business issue.
Right, Mr. Gupta. Thanks so much for taking out time for us. Always good to get perspective from you. In fact, earlier in the day, we